Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a great lunch or nap if you're not in the correct time zone, like myself. We're going to follow our last GraphQL talk with a wonderful talk by Christina here with me. Hello, Christina.
Hi.
She's going to be talking about the soft skills that you need to run the perfect load test, which is not something I typically consider when I'm writing tests, but I'm excited to hear about that. I am obligated to remind you that interacting in the Q&A box will put you in a draw to win some packet books. Very important. So anyway, with my my spiel done, I'll leave it to you, Christina.
Right, let me share my screen and I should be good to go. Hi, everyone. Good morning for me, and I guess good evening or afternoon for most of you, and then yeah, good good night maybe for some of you as well. So I'm so glad to be part of this TestCon, and thank you so much for introducing me, Jims. And you could follow me on Twitter, and I guess you could connect to me on LinkedIn if there's any sort of questions that you have after this talk. And I hope this is helpful for you. So before we jump into the talk, I want to share some survey details with you. So this survey that was conducted, it was conducted actually about 4 years ago. So kind of, old survey. But what I'm trying to say is that even though it was conducted 4 or 5 years ago, it is, you can see the expectations of the end users are high in terms of load time, right? So you could see that just because of 1-second delays in page load times, especially when you focus about e-commerce applications, there was 11% fewer page views, and there was 16% decrease in customer satisfaction. There was a 7% of loss, and there was also a theory that Amazon had found that for every 100 milliseconds that they had improvement in their site speed, there was a direct connection with the increase in revenue. So there was a 1% increase in revenue. And this is another survey, again, pretty old, I would say, because why I want to mention that it's old is if the expectations were high then, they probably have increased at the current stage. So we are now in 2021, and obviously the end users' expectations have increased. So at that time, based on the survey that was conducted, 47, almost half of the users who took this survey said that they expected the page to load less than 2 seconds, right? And like 40% said that they'll just abandon the page after it takes more than 3 seconds to load. And like 52% of the online shoppers mentioned saying that it takes the page load times are very important for their loyalty to the site. So that is how important performance is, but seldom does most of the teams think about performance. There's a lot of importance that we need to give to non-functional testing as well, just not performance alone. But unfortunately, not all teams think about it. Either they leave it to a silo team and then they pick it up at a later stage, and then you have issues. So based on this and the discussion we just had, performance testing really matters, right? And then there might be a few of you say, oh, don't worry, we have it all sorted. We are running performance tests, and yeah, we have it already in place. But do you still spot issues in production? Like, seriously, do you see issues in production even though you know don't have to worry because you have performance tests? Well, I think maybe you're missing something. Yeah, I'm actually trying to say is, yeah, there's something that you might be doing wrong. So in the past, when I was also doing performance testing, like, you know, initial stages of my career, I had some wrong ideas about it. I didn't do it in the right way, and we'll talk about it. So today, we're going to talk about the softs you need to run the perfect load test. Now, we're going to concentrate on also the soft skills that's also very important in running the perfect load. Now you would wonder, okay, what is this all about? But there's a lot of groundwork that you need to do before you get into scripting. So ideally, our idea is that we get the scripts, we run it for like, hundreds, thousands of users, and that's it. We think it's performance well done. Well, that's not how it is, and that's one of the mistakes that I made, and we're going to discuss about that. So the agenda for today is we're going to talk about what performance testing is, what are we trying to achieve when doing performance testing, what are the soft skills that are helpful for getting the right load, and also for us to do performance testing, we need to see the whole process of from the very beginning of getting the requirements right. Now, what is performance testing? It's about seeing if your application is reliable. How often can it handle a certain amount of load, a certain amount of users coming in, a certain amount of usage. When I say usage, it doesn't only rely on the user count that's coming into the application, but what sort of transactions are they doing? Are they doing some heavy lifting transactions like uploads and downloads and so on? And like, whether the application is stable, understanding the stability, how fast is the application? Like we were talking about speed in the first two slides, right? We were talking about how speed impacts the end users to like your application and use your application, and how you lose them if you don't really think about that. And scalability, on how much like is scalable your application can handle as hundreds and thousands of users slowly come into your application. Picture it's something like a Black Friday sale. I'm not sure if everyone would have such a scenario, but like here in the US, Black Friday, we also have something called Cyber Monday. Everyone's jumping into the applications to purchase something. And on that day, you're going to have a lot of traffic, and it'll be embarrassing if your application is failing, right? So you need to see if, okay, on a normal day, if you're at a given point, if your application can handle thousands of users, on that specific day, you're looking at about 10,000 of users. So you'll have to see if the applications can scale as well. So this is the overall thing about looking at performance. But why do we have to do performance testing? We also looked at the first two slides, which kind of gave us the gist of why performance testing is important. However, there's other things in terms of that needs to be considered, and that's why we need to look into performance testing. We need to see if the application is ready for production. We need to evaluate against the performance criteria and see if it can match it. When I say criteria, like if you have the the industry standards, you need to check those industry standards and make decisions whether your application is up to that standard. You need to see if it can handle with multiple systems. Sometimes the culprit might not be the entire application, might be a single component. You would want to narrow it down. You want to see where the bottlenecks are, and then you could do fine tuning and fine, in case there's memory leaks, you get them sorted at an early stage rather than you wait right at the end, right? And it's always good to have it reported and you have the historical data in one place. The next thing is how to determine if performance testing is necessary. So end of the day, it is necessary, but these are certain questions that you're looking to answer by the end of the entire performance testing execution, right? You need to know, if someone asks the team how much load is your application able to handle in terms of whether it's a app or a web service, you need to be able to have the answers for that. Is it stable? Is it scalable? Even if it's scalable, till how much is it scalable? What is like the standard response time under load, and like how is the client side behavior under load, and so on. And also like whether the hardware needs to be fine-tuned or has it been fine-tuned for the expected load, and so on. So these are the questions that we are looking to answer here. But we are also going to look at this list of soft skills that we are going to talk about as we go through understanding the process of how to prepare for running the perfect load. Now, these are some of the key soft skills that you would have to develop or basically have in you or in the team so that you would be able to get the right details and make the right decisions and run the perfect load test, right? Or the perfect performance test. So this is the overall list. So you have to think about, like, you should have communication skills. It's not only your speaking or writing skills, but it's also going to be listening skills, because you need to understand the application, you need to talk about it, ask questions and so on. There's a lot of teamwork that's going to be involved, because it's not a single army kind of testing, because you're not going to test your particular component in isolation. If you're talking about an entire workflow, it's going to probably involve other components, and you would want to interact with them. You have to run this whole process. You will have to have your leadership skills. You have to manage time, because you need to think of other team members' times as well, not just your own. Decision making, there's a lot of decisions that you'll have to make. We'll talk about that. There's a lot of conflict that might happen in terms of like views and getting environments and so on. So we'll talk about that as well. And you will be you'll have to have the skills to resolve those. You'll have to have critical thinking in order to get your workload model and your scripts designed in some manner. Then your networking and problem solving skills are also very key for this. So this is the question that that I kind of would ask all of you. And I think there's this conception that would you do performance testing? And this is like the common conception, and this is the idea that I had, I think, when I started my career and thought, oh, performance testing, you just select a performance testing tool, you learn it, you script the critical flows, and then execute it for hundreds and thousands of users, just like that, randomly. And no, this is completely not the right way, and it kind of did not give me the right results when I was looking for the answers in terms of bottlenecks or performance issues. So this is just a disclaimer. So this particular presentation doesn't like carry any details from any specific organization that I was related to. This is like a compilation of like the organizations that I have worked with and currently am working with, so that it'll help you to get all the ideas of what worked well for me. And so first of all, we need to set the groundwork. So this is like the entire process of from what we start and get the perfect load to be executed. So this is the whole idea of making sure that you organize your process. Like, you need to make sure that you use your organizing skills and your planning skills to set the groundwork. You design the flow, the process. You see on how, who do you talk to, where do you communicate, and what sort of discussions are you going to have, and how are you going to come up with the workload? What's the set of tools that you need to discuss and get and start working on, and so on, in case you don't have a standard performance testing tool, and do things like POCs to make sure that it works well for the and it fits the purpose. So these kind of things would fall under you're setting up the groundwork. So you need to straighten the existing test process if you have a performance testing process, or you will have to lay it out, and we will talk about some of the important things that you need to consider when you're laying that out, right? So performance testing process, this is like an overview. There might be a few more things that you might want to add based on your particular situation, your particular application that you're testing. But overall, this is like, again, a compilation of what worked well for me in the different teams that I worked with. So ideally, you would be starting off with gathering info about the product and then analyzing it. This time, it's not about understanding only the functionality, but also understanding the layers and all components that are connected to your particular application, so that you know that the application can work in isolation. See if you can set up things like mock services, so you test the application in isolation, and then you also test the entire flow. So those ideas only can be, you could make those decisions only after you understand the architecture of the application overall. And this is the second part, is where you start creating the test plan, where you start working on things like also deciding on like the tools and like doing a proof of concept and so on, to see whether it works or it fits the purpose, or the existing process that you have fits the purpose. If not, you will have to see of looking out for some change in the process as well. You also prepare the test scenarios. Like now, the gathering of the information is where you really do a lot of groundwork, and we will be talking about that. And once you have that, it's pretty smooth, because in terms of coming up with the scripts and so on, because that is that gray area. If you don't have that idea, you don't know who to communicate with, who you could get help with, and who you can get help to monitor each of the other components that you don't have access to, and so on. It could be internal teams, it could be external vendors. So you need to bring that collaboration in, because end of the day, when there's an issue, and if it's not on your side of things, but still you're not getting the right responses, or it's failing, it is like a port issue, or something is not responding anymore after a certain load, it could be some middleware or some other component. And for you to have that, you need to have the right discussions, right? You need to have the right people monitoring at that particular time. So that's where we bring in not just the organization skills, but like communication, networking, and so on. So we'll talk about it. You need to confirm your scenarios with like either it's a customer or your business. It depends on what sort of environment you're working at. You should, because you need to understand that you need to take the right scenarios, right? Like for example, forgot password is probably a flow that kind of isn't used frequently, but obviously login and things like adding items to a cart, thinking of an e-commerce application, would be one of the frequently used transactions, right? So you need to make sure that you understand that, so you could use analytics and stuff like that if you don't have access to like talking directly to the customers or end users and so on. And you could then move on to estimation, designing and executing the testing scripts. You then record and manage those scripts, and then you choose like a suitable day to run the test. You can definitely do a lot of dry runs for yourself, but like when it's a end-to-end flow and it involves other entities or other teams, you need to have them involved as well. You need to prepare the load and infrastructure. You need to make sure that your particular environment is somewhat like production like, or something that can be close to it, so that you don't really do a test that is not realistic. You run the test and then you generate the execution reports. That's like the overall gist of things. So for that, first of all, you just see if it is feasible to conduct the test. So you need to see if the existing strategy or framework works well, which we spoke about this, and then you create a proof of concept. If not, if with the existing tool, or choose another tool, and then you look at the most complicated flow, and then make the decision whether that particular tool works well. So this is a lot of decision making that goes on in terms of you doing basically making the decisions of which tool to use, and which one works well, and so on. Now, here is where the important part is. So we have to understand the business priority and like the application, application environment, workload, the expected performance. When I say SLAs or SLOs, it's basically service level agreements, or basically that means is like you have agreed that this is the amount of time that's going to take, and based on that, or service level objectives, like that's the set of objectives that you have for the application, and if it exceeds that, you have a problem. That kind of like, how much time it's going to take to load, how many users are we maximum trying to cater for at a given point, and so on. So these are things that you need to determine based on like analytic data. And you need to understand the growth pattern, because this is important for you to make decisions for the future as well. So here we are understanding the business priority. This is really important because you need to understand the critical business workflows. You need to understand whether there was performance testing expected to be like done before. If so, like, if you could get those details, and why is it and when is it expected for? Is there like a timeline for this like engagement, if it's something that, if it is an engagement of that sort, or is it something that you'll have to continuously be doing, and so on. So those questions need to be answered, and this involves a lot of your communication skills, because you need to understand how the communication is being done, and understand how the particular application works, and how does performance play a major role here. You also need to again ask the important questions about the application, like understand the infrastructure, what's the stack, why in terms of we need to do a certain amount of users, and like, is there an architecture diagram between production and test, because there might be restrictions on you having a production like environment to run your performance test. You can't run your performance test in production, that's not okay. So you would want to find the issues at an early stage, so you would want to run it in a test environment. You may call it in various different ways, but it's not going to be a production environment. So you need to ask and ask the right questions. So you're going to put your critical thinking hat here, and you would be trying to get all these details, understanding the application inside out, and making this will help you in making the right decisions when you are writing your scripts. The other thing is you will now have to understand the application environment. This is where you will have to work with other teams who help you with the like setting up the environment. Try your best to get something production-like. It's not easy. In most of the teams that I worked with, getting that, it's expensive, and usually companies don't really help in going in that mode. It's pretty difficult, but see if they can spin up something for a temporary period, and something that's like production. Now there could be restrictions on you having the same production data, but you could definitely create dummy data and so on. So this is where you will have to not only work within your team, but also work with other teams. So that's where your teamwork skills will be really helpful. And you'll also need to do conflict resolutions, right? Because sometimes there can be miscommunication when you're trying to get these things sorted. There could be situations where it cannot be done, but you are trying your best to get it done, and there might be you might want to come on some common ground, and understanding on getting something that works for you and for the team that sets up the environment and so on. So that's where your conflict resolution skills are going to be helpful. The next part is we need to decide on like the workload model. So this is where you will be making this will help you make your decisions. So understanding the workload model in terms of how many concurrent users come into the application in the monthly, weekly, daily, hourly basis. Understand the frequent transactions, so that you can make your scripts in that way. So this is going to help you with that part of things. Understand, like, what is the resource incentives, and like in terms of like the technology, or also the distribution, which are the components that get hit in when you do a particular transaction. This also helps you determine which sort of data that needs to be created, and like what sort of tests are we going to like. As you know, performance testing has a lot of different types of testing within that. So are we going to only stick to a load test, or are we going to do a stress test, or are we going to do an endurance test? So for those who don't know what an endurance test is, it's like you have a specific time period and basically generate the load and the transactions that is done in a particular given date, right? So or given day time within that time, so you're basically mimicking that. So these are some of the things that you need to look out for. You need to start deciding on what sort of response times, throughput, and like determine the server health as well. This again, you need to talk with the right teams, especially like the the system administrators or like DevOps teams, to understand what is the most healthy state and what are we trying to achieve here. And also, we're trying to understand the growth pattern. This is important. I know that most of the time this is not given much consideration. If we are targeting to have only 10,000 users in an application registered, we like tend to just leave it that. We aren't planning for the future, which is not okay, because sometimes you never know if you're gonna all of a sudden have a flow of more users than the standard. Then there might be glitches and you might have surprises. So for that, it's always good to have the idea of the growth pattern and plan accordingly. So ideally, the test scope is that you would want the application to be ready in production, right? So if it's already ready in production, as in if you have a legacy application, you would decide on like using the analytics data based on it, just see how the usual critical flows are, the highly consumed business scenarios, and like the resource consumed business scenarios and so on. But if it's in development stage, then you'll have to see the general trend outside and see how it works, and then come up with the obvious, talk to the business. So this is where your communication skills will come into play, where we were talking about the first two slides that we were talking about, talking to understanding the business and understanding the application, and seeing which particular flows are going to be the highly consumed business scenarios, or highly critical, or what are the resource consumed scenarios. Based on this, you will make your decisions on what the workload model is going to be, in terms of, are you going to start with 100% of the users that we are going to have, and then or you're going to start with like 25%, 50%, and then gradually increase the load. You also would want to understand the future growth pattern, and so I try to target for that, like just see if it's like a specific percentage that we are planning in the next 6 months or 1 year. Maybe see if you could at least do half of it or some percentage of it. So these decisions are made and have to be made. So that's where your decision making hat needs to be put on, and you will have to discuss and understand, and with the team, to make the right decisions. Now we've gathered all that information. So you could see that this many slides that we just discussed about, all these slides were actually the previous ones were all about the preparation and the requirement understanding and gathering of understanding the information about the application. This is where we come to the planning stage. And yeah, as you can see, once we have those questions answered, we've critically thought about things, and we've made our decisions. Planning phase is going to be pretty simple. So we need to make sure that we have the right test types. We've decided on them. What sort of test approach? Like, what's the workload that we're going to do? Is there some sort of constraints, risks? When you're working with other teams, there might be certain things that might not be able to be done. So you basically mention them, and also determine what is the entry criteria and exit criteria. Are you good to start performance testing based on a certain behavior of the application? Like, is it like, functionality sound? If most of the important functionality is already in place, or you would want to wait for most of it to be completed. So those decisions need to be made and put into this test planning, this plan as well. And like exit criteria, how do we then move out and say we have completed performance testing? Now, this is where you do your problem solving, right? You have the plan, you know what are the critical workflows, you've made your decisions on the workload. Now you need to solve the problem of basically writing the scripts, right? It depends on what kind of tools you have. Make sure that you use the right process. So it's definitely a different conversation about how we can make sure that we write the more better scripts than writing scripts with, like, everything hard coded and so on. Basically having dynamic scripts so that the scripts do not have to rely on any hard coded data, and everything goes in a flow. The users you use should be like unique and so on. So this is where you need to solve the problem of writing the realistic transactions and in the realistic load and so on. So all that gathering of information that you've done is now going to be utilized, and you'll be solving the problem. You also need to run tests with and without any sort of background noise. So as you do talk in terms of understanding the application, talking to business, interacting with other teams, understand which sort of background noises are run at a particular time. Is it like run in like the daytime or in like late night, even if your application is being used by different people, like internationally, like today in this conference, there's so many of us using the application in different time zones, and therefore we want to make sure that the application is okay. So for that, we need to also see if there's any background noise that's running at a particular time. If so, we have a problem. So we have to figure that out. So these discussions need to be made. So this is one point that I want you to keep in mind while you also discuss, because this is seldom thought of, and this could cause a lot of issues, and that's one of the reasons why you're having your facepalm situation of having production issues even though you're running your performance script. So this discussion might have not been done, or this was not communicated, and you would want these details in as well. This is very important, because you need to make sure that you have everything in the process. Everyone is aware that they need to monitor their components. So it's, you are running the load, but you want each of the components to be monitored, because in case you find some issue, you want to bring everyone into a room and discuss, troubleshoot it, have like a war room and understand why that issue was occurring. It's probably because all of a sudden one of the middleware components cannot handle the load, and the port fails. It's happened before for one of the teams that I worked with, and it just wouldn't send that transaction. Like the API gateway wasn't working, and it wasn't transmitting any of the details to the other side, so which is not okay, right? So therefore you need to get everyone into this time slot. You need to have a trial run with everyone so that they know what they're doing. So this is where you need to network with the right people, get them all involved. You need to manage the time, because you want to consider everyone's time as well, and everyone's time is important. So make sure that you don't hinder any of their, if they have any sort of project deadlines or something of that sort. See if you can be flexible, and so that you gain their cooperation and you are also cooperating with them, because this is vital. Because in case, like, say, I've also worked in teams where we have like run the load, we found an issue, we're not sure where the issue is, because it was not on our side, it was in somewhere in the middle, but we didn't know where it was, and nobody was monitoring it because they were just going to pick up the logs the next day. And that was painful because again we had to run the test again and again because they weren't able to really spot the issues. It's always good to have impromptu or live. uh, they monitor the system live so that they know what's going on, they know how much load you're putting in, so that's helpful rather than like the next day they come and pick up the logs and they're like, oh well, there's some sort of issue, the server error, but we don't really know what went wrong. So that's painful. So finally, now we've come to, once we do the trial run, we've come to the phase where we are ready for the execution. And this is where all your planning comes into place and you start executing. You specify the time slots, you communicate before you start like the test, you communicate it to everyone so that they know that you're going to kick off the test. If there's any red flags before you kick off the test, let everyone know. Get the monitoring guys in place, make sure that they're all there. If there's a failure, most of the times, most of the teams I've worked with, they kind of go easy with like 2% failures, but then there have been teams where we've had a massive consideration on why it was going issues. So it's best for you to, if you see issues, see why they're happening. If it could be because of your scripts also. So even though you've done your trial run, etc., so you just want to double check that. You also want to see if there's an issue, you immediately raise it and then probably don't proceed with a higher load. Maybe if you could go with a low load and see whether it's the load that's actually creating an issue. So those decisions you would be making on the fly sometimes because it might not work as the plan that you made initially. So these are some of the very important things that you have to really think about, like things like response times, network bandwidth, thread counts, and so on, because these are the metrics that you are going to collect, and your documentation skills are going to put this all in a report and share it with everyone who is involved, not just you, your team, but also the vendors or the internal teams, the people involved with other components, the monitoring them also need to be able to analyze these matrix, and they should be able to understand how the application is behaving. So this is where you you put your analytics skill sets, and you would analyze and understand how the particular behavior was. You need to actually have at least a minimum amount of 2 rounds for each of the loads so that you really know that if there's an issue that it is, it's not like intermittent, but seriously there's an issue there. You need to understand like the difference between like if there's any errors, failures, get everyone into a room and start looking at this. Finally, like I said, all that detail that you gathered, you would be basically discussing them, and then you will put them in like a document. And this is where your documentation soft skills will play a major role, because you want everyone to understand what was done and what was the final results, so that everyone is okay with the application behaving in a certain manner, and that we have the historical data say that the application is sound. If not, it's going to be hard, because you might be running the same test in the future and it might be failing, and if you don't have the right documentation done with like the clear details, you're going to have a problem. Finally, I just want to leave you with this has this is not about like any soft skills, but I strongly suggest that you need to conduct constant monitoring and alerting in production as well, even though you're doing the performance tests and you've been doing all these requirement gathering, writing the right scripts, and doing the reporting and so on, because this is important. And most of the teams, I believe, are doing this. But if you aren't, please get get the idea to your team that even if there's any sort of issues in production, if you have monitoring and alerting, you might be able to get them fixed ASAP, then right kind of wait like at the last minute, or like when everything is just breaking and falling off. Finally, some other checks that I recommend that you can do is basically client-side profiling with load. So this is like, you could use like Lighthouse, so which is a Chrome plugin. There's also other tools, like paid tools, that you can use as well. I mean, you don't really have to go to use any specific tool that I mentioned, something that works for you. I suggest you do it for a single session, and also do it while load is running. You might find issues. Trust me, it has happened. And then you do like component level testing and isolation. So get your vendors, us, or anyone in terms of the internal teams who are part of these components that you've been having to monitor, get them also to do performance testing, so that, you know, individually we know that the components are safe and sound. You also need to do, like, think of endurance testing. So we spoke about that as well, where you select a time slot and start getting users into the application, getting them out, basically depicting a specific day or a usage time. And continuous sprint level testing is key. You don't have to do a fully fledged testing like how I mentioned now. This is a entire end-to-end flow where you get everyone involved, but maybe very basic testing can help you find issues at an early stage, and don't really have to worry about a lot later. So that's all that I have for you. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, you could follow me on Twitter or LinkedIn. And yeah, you could ask me any questions, but yeah, I can take some questions now.
Great. So we've got about 4 minutes and only one question. So if anyone wants to pop in with another question, that would be fantastic. But someone has asked, I'm Australian, so I won't be able to pronounce the name, but have you come across stress testing of telecom functions? And have you ever had to pick a tool for a telecommunications company?
Actually, I haven't had a situation where I had to do anything with telecommunications, but there has been circumstances where I had to do sort of performance testing for mobile applications. And for that, what I can say was, yeah, specific tools that were helpful for me was, there are some paid tools that are available that works, like, you know, the NeoLoad and like Blaze Meter. They're helpful, but you can also look at Appium. If you're doing like functional level testing, you could use the Android profiler with Appium. I think I've spoken about this in a different talk as well. And you can also use the iOS. There's a profiler for that as well, that they have part of Xcode that you can use in terms of your, like, the simulator, and that should be helpful, but nothing in terms of working directly with telecommunication companies and so on. But definitely you would want your network bandwidth to be monitored while you are doing a performance testing. So for that purpose, yes, we got some system administrators involved, so that we know that, you know, from the server side, we are not having any network bandwidth issues as well. And yes, they were able to communicate with the people who provide the connections and so on for when we needed to do fine tuning, but anything specific to this. Yeah.
Very good. So with that, thank you so much for your time, Christina. It's great talk. I'm ready to go start my performance load test plan and build my soft skills. So thank you.
Thank you.
And,
thank you for having me. Take care.
All right. See you around. We'll be back in like 5 minutes. Stay tuned.